An Indian influencer, Sachin Avasthi, with his wife Dipshika, recently went to Jeju Islands, a very famous tourist destination in South Korea. Now, they had everything planned. Their return tickets, their itinerary, the travel insurance, everything. Now, why is Jeju Island suddenly so famous among Indians? Well, because they allow visa-free access to Indians. Now, when they went there, they had everything in place. At the immigration counter, they were detained. With no reason given, with nothing asked, just looking at their passport, they were detained. They were asked to buy a ticket back to India. They were being deported without any reason given. Stories like this circulate a lot in immigrant communities. Some people are detained, some people are never given the visa, some people are simply given the rejection stamp, some people are told to take the flight back home. Many people from countries like Japan, Singapore, United States, Germany would never even think or know what this is like. This brings us to an uncomfortable question. Is the world really open for everyone? Or is freedom of movement dependent on where you were born? This brings us to a very important concept called passport privilege. Passport privilege simply means that people from some countries are given more freedom of movement than the others. For example, citizens from Germany, Japan, Singapore are allowed access to 190 countries visa-free, but citizens from India, Nigeria, Indonesia are not. They have to show a huge, thick booklet of documents to be able to be granted entry. And visas are not simple. Visas require a lot of paperwork. Visas require for you to prove that you are not a liability. Visas require for you to prove that you're going to be coming back. Visas require for you to show bank statements, sponsorship letters, income, guarantee that you're going to be coming back and showing that you have a life back home so that you're not going to be invading their country to go and stay over there forever. And nowadays, it also needs there's some kind of moral policing that's happened because they also check your social media accounts and your take on what kind of political views that you have. But the funniest part is, after showing all these documents, they have the power to simply put a rejection stamp because you seemed suspicious or because they thought that they didn't feel like giving you the visa. According to data from the European Commission, visa rejection rates for applicants from several African countries applying to the Schengen area can exceed 20%. So two people with the same income, same interests, same education, same way of being, lifestyles can have two completely different experiences just based on the nationality that they have. Political philosopher Ayelet Shachar describes this as the birthright lottery. None of us choose where we are born, but yet that one simple, accidental birth can define a very powerful thing: how easily you can move across borders. The invention of the passport. What's interesting is that the modern passport as we know it is something relatively new. For most of human history, people moved freely, almost always through borders. You had merchants who traveled through trade networks across the Silk Route, connecting Asia, Middle East, Europe. You had nomadic groups that migrated with their livestock. You had religious communities that traveled across religious continents. And there wasn't any sort of strict control across borders at that point. Modern passport system only became widespread during World War I. During the war, governments started monitoring travelers specifically to prevent espionage or cross-migration. Temporary wartime documents eventually evolved into the standardized passport system that we know today. In 1920, the League of Nations held a conference that helped standardize passport formats internationally. So the modern passport was not designed for tourism, it was designed for state control. Today's scholars call this passportism. What is passportism? Passportism describes a system where movement is distributed unequally based on your nationality. In other words, the world has an invisible hierarchy of movement. In my previous videos, we've seen about the theories of sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, where he defines how certain aspects of our life, social life, can be described based on the capital that we possess. Social capital, financial capital, cultural capital. In today's modernized world, the passport becomes a kind of a mobility capital. It determines which opportunities are accessible to you internationally. Unlike education or income, you cannot earn it. You inherit it. Colonial history and unequal mobility. The hierarchy of passports reflects historical power structures. During the era of European colonization, movement was heavily regulated for colonized people. Passports and permits were issued mainly to control labor and have economic dominance. Many of these countries became independent in the mid-20th century. The global mobility system had already been shaped by centuries of unequal political and economic power. And because of that colonization, today passports from so-called developed or wealthy countries are looked at as something that's a privilege, or it's more trusted by authorities, while passports from the so-called developing or weak countries are looked at as a migration risk. That is where the hierarchy of passports reflect the hierarchy of wealth and class and control. And you have a layered privilege through a diaspora identity. As diaspora, maybe you live in the UK, in the US, or in Canada, or in Spain, or in Germany. You have that citizenship of that particular country. And to come into India, you are given your OCI card, that is your Overseas Citizen of India card privilege. So when you go back to India, you have that thing to select. You have that option to select to go back with the OCI card. And also, you get to comment on the politics, on the things, the happenings of the country very nicely when you critique it, and then you very easily go back to your new country of nationality. But the people who live in those countries of your origin that you have left behind still have to bear the brunt of all the situations that have been plunged upon them. This is called strategic citizenship. It's a multi-passport phenomenon. Same thing could be where someone who has multiple ancestry. People navigate different legal identities to maximize mobility. In some parts of the world, mobility privilege becomes even more layered with multi-passport holders. Could be through ancestry. For example, someone might have Italian, Irish, and Spanish citizenship because your grandparents came from different countries. Even if they've never been to any of those countries, they get enormous mobility privilege because they had ancestry over there. Sometimes creates a very interesting paradox because many a times these people have never been to these countries, don't even speak the language of these countries, and yet they get to speak passionately about their home country where they've never really stepped foot into or even know the language of. Meanwhile, citizens of these countries struggle to get even a single visa entry for their travel. We are witnessing an increased amount of conflicts in the world, be it with the Russia or Ukraine war, be it what we are witnessing right now with the US, Israel, and Iran, where when conflicts break down, many people are wanting to escape normally from that place of crisis, place of conflict. Can be millionaires who have a lot of access to wealth to be able to book a private jet and get away from it, escape from the place of conflict. And then you have people with so-called powerful passports and passport privileges whose countries are going to send out evacuation flights for them in the first place. But then again, we had seen during the Ukraine and Russia war, many Asian students were stuck in Ukraine, not being able to get out because the evacuation was being prioritized for people from a bit better, stronger passport. It's also the psychology of passport privilege. Passport privilege also reveals how you look at the world. If you were born with a passport which is a bit stronger, then if you want to travel, you look at travel or going to airports as something that is light, something which is easy, something that is fun because you're taking a flight to get to your new beautiful destination. But it's not the same lived experience for many people who have a so-called weak passport. Someone who has not the passport privilege, who does not have the passport privilege, whenever they have to get to the airport or whenever they have to book a flight, it is not just booking a flight and forgetting everything about it. It's about knowing the amount of paperwork that you have to organize to be able to get that visa and mentally processing and knowing that that visa could be rejected and you might not be a part of the plan that you are trying to create, or you might not be granted that visa. Or when you land at the immigration desk office, it would probably be 10 questions or 6 questions, or just a lot of looks that might look like a suspicion. This is a lived reality of many, many people across the world, not only in their countries of origins, but also this doesn't stop when you travel to a different place outside of your country, because the paperwork doesn't stop. If you are moving to a different country with your original passport, you still have to do a lot of paperwork to be able to get that residency. And if you get that residency after all the struggle, you still have to show tons and tons of paperwork and and prove your stay as if you are not a criminal, you are not doing anything wrong. You're simply trying to create and flourish and beautifully make your life with a lot of paperwork. Sociologists sometimes call this mobility confidence. Travelers approach the borders with ease. Some travelers approach the borders with anxiety. Language also becomes a very important part in this discourse. When citizens of wealthy countries travel abroad or move abroad, they are called as digital nomads or expats, or they can buy the residencies through the new golden visa arrivals. But the same thing, when citizens of a so-called weaker passport move to a different country, they are looked at as migrants, as immigrants. The difference is not movement, the difference is perception. Conversations about privilege can always sometimes feel uncomfortable, but recognizing your privilege is not about creating a kind of guilt or feeling guilty. It is about creating awareness. It is about understanding how mobility is distributed unequally to be able to create empathy. If you hold a powerful passport, it would mean advocating for more visa-free zones, advocating for equal mobility, support visa-free policies, advocate for humanitarian corridors, supporting for more mobility opportunities. It would mean having patience through the visa process system with the others. It might also just recognizing that your version of travel is not universal. Borders are the most powerful lines that humans have created. The passport system that we live in today is the result of history, power, and politics. But it is also a human invention, and like any invention, it can also evolve. The first step towards a fairer movement of mobility is to recognize that the current one exists. Share resources, help friends navigate complex visa systems, and change this narrative of expat versus migrant. Know when this language is being triggered. And sometimes the most powerful hierarchies are the ones we barely notice. And this time, it is passport privilege. After decolonization, former colonial powers retained strong diplomatic influence. Their passports remained trusted, while many newly independent nations' passports were weaker. In 1961, the Henley Passport Index shows that the Western European passports consistently ranked in the top tier of global access, a legacy of colonial networks. Saskia Sassen's concept of global cities and privileged mobility highlights that movement is stratified, reflecting the power of states and their citizens. For many people from the global south, the most common solution to face this inequality is simply change your passport, migrate, study abroad, naturalize in the West. Place your passport with a stronger one, even if it takes you 10 years to do. And for many people, that decision can make sense. Mobility can open many doors for opportunities and things that you've always wanted to do without so many restrictions. When people feel the only way to combat this inequality is to take a Western passport, it reinforces a very age-old belief of colonial power and distribution. In a way, mobility itself begins to mirror what once was defined as colonial systems. That the more closer you are to the political and economic systems of the West, the closer you are to freedom. So perhaps one of the most quiet, radical acts today can be to succeed with your passport of origin. To succeed globally without abandoning your original identity. To travel, create, build everywhere with the passport that you were born with. Because the world is changing. Travel patterns are changing. Migration is changing. Economic powers are changing. New global centers are shifting across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The hierarchy of passports, which feels dominant and powerful today, is a product of a historical moment. And history has a habit of changing. Holding onto your passport, your language, your culture, your place in the world can be a very radical and a beautiful and a powerful way to say that dignity and power should not depend on your proximity to Western standards. That the future of the world will not be defined by one central power, but by many.